University of the Western Cape in the Information Systems Department, and I have a great interest on the ethics and governance of data.
And my name is Nando de Freitas. I'm a principal scientist at Google DeepMind, and also I'm a fellow of the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research.
Okay, so can we have a round of applause for this wonderful panel? So some housekeeping before we begin. We're using this amazing tool called Slido to get questions. So in case you're shy and afraid of talking in public, feel free to send questions, comments to Slido. But then, of course, it would be much better if we had an actual conversation and could put names and faces to questions and comments. So there's also mics on the sides of the room. If you have something to contribute, feel free to also just stand up and walk to there. But if you do choose to be using Slido, I can see people already being entertained by what's going on there. You can also upvote questions. I'm hoping there will be many questions. So if you have threatened us with difficult questions, please ask them. Anya, I see you. But yeah, feel free to also upvote whatever questions you'd like the panel to take on. Okay, so now we can begin. I'm going to ask everyone to stand up. We're going to start with a bit of an unconventional exercise. So you guys as well. Okay, we can start by stretching, but that wasn't part of my plan. Omo, did you want to lead us in stretching?
No!
Okay, so I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, and if you fit the criteria, no, actually, if you do not fit the criteria, you sit down, okay? So, for example, who has an afro? So if you have an afro, stay standing. If you...
Wait, what does that mean? Like,
What
does
qualifies?
that mean I can wear my
technically
hair
have
as
one.
an afro, or
No, it means...
I have an afro now?
Yes, you have an afro now.
But does this qualify?
Maybe
Technically,
a
it's an
teeny
afro.
weeny afro. I'll say yes. Yes, it qualifies. So do you have an afro? If you do, you can stay standing. If you don't, then you sit down. Okay, okay, cool. So this was a test. Okay, guys, thank you, thank you. Can we quieten down? Can we quieten down? And then everyone get back to standing. So congratulations, you have successfully passed the test. So now we're going to begin. Okay. If you have prior experience of, say, longer than 2 years with coding in C, C++, Java, and or Python, remain standing. Okay, can we keep it down so that we can move things along? Okay. If you have completed a 4-year undergraduate course in any field, remain standing. No. If you already sat down, you can't stand up again. You remain seated. Yeah. Okay. If you have over 2 years experience with data mining, data science, and or machine learning, remain standing. Okay. Where do you fit? You sat in, okay. If you have a master's degree or PhD in computer science, artificial intelligence, machine learning, or related technical fields, remain standing.
Oh no, my women.
Okay. If you obtained this master's or PhD degree at an institution not on the African continent, remain standing.
If you got the PhD or master's in an institution that is not on the African continent, remain standing.
Okay. If you have published a paper that has been accepted at a leading academic conference, such as NIPS, ICML, ACL, CVPR, I don't know what most of these abbreviations stand for, but remain standing if you have. Okay. If you are passionate about the mission of the Indaba, which is strengthening machine learning in Africa, take your seats. Okay. So there's a couple of people standing. They must be quite exceptional. But I guess we can continue now. So basically, this exercise was just meant to set the tone for the session that we're about to have. And the reason we're having this conversation is because we live in a time when organizations and societies are increasingly becoming reliant on machine learning to make all sorts of decisions. And it ranges from who to hire, who to give a loan, who you should go out on a date with, who should be sentenced or who should be given parole, all sorts of things. And the effects of these algorithms and of artificial intelligence is global, but then the creation is not. You find that it's very siloed, and it's siloed geographically, it's siloed sectorally, with a small number of companies driving for these technologies, with little insight from different industries, disciplines, social classes, cultures, and countries. So this little exercise we have done actually started very high level. If you guys are actually I don't know, you're a pretty privileged sample, yeah? A very biased sample. If we had the whole African continent standing up, and then we started at who has programming experience, very many people would not be standing. If we started to think as basic as who has proficiency in the English language, or a certain level of proficiency in the English language, already people are sitting down and are not able to sit down and participate in the conversation in this room just because of all these things that are structurally acting as barriers to their participation, yeah? So my first question to the panel, and really to the audience at large, is what are we currently doing and what more can we do to democratize machine learning on the African continent? It's a pretty broad question, so feel free to answer at an individual level. What can an individual do? What can groups of individuals come together to do? What initiatives are there that are currently trying to fill this gap? How can we support them? And again, like I said, it's a conversation. So if you have something to say, if you have a question to add, please use Slido or start making your way to the mics at the corners. And then also, I'd really like this session to be audience-driven, so that was my one question. So guys, I hope you have other questions, because we have about an hour, okay? So who would like to begin?
Oh, wow. Well, coming from a university academic environment, what you mentioned at the beginning about privilege is so important. In a South African context, and I think this applies generally in an African context, we lose the students right from high school. We lose the students who cannot even get into university, into a computer science degree. So I think one thing that we value at UWC is the importance of actually having high school-based initiatives, because you can't be talking about machine learning in research context of master's and PhD when you're not even getting students to register for your computer science degrees. So exposure at a young age is so critical, not only for getting students into the field, but also getting diverse students in the field. Otherwise, you continue to remain having the same type of students within the field taking decisions on algorithms that affect our daily lives, but yet kind of like out of the touch with reality. Another aspect is actually having academic programs that are geared towards ensuring skills within the area. I think in the last 3 years, we've managed to start a master's in data science. In another faculty, we've managed to start a postgraduate diploma in business intelligence and data analytics, and a bit unrelated, virtual reality and augmented reality, VR and AR. So I think skills development for me forms pretty much the crux. Exposure and skills development forms the crux of ensuring that we get to be in here today and having the conversations that we're actually having.
Anyone else want to take on the question?
So one thing that I have seen that has been working is mentoring. So if you get people in the pipeline, the next step often is they need mentors and people to actually help guide the work that they're doing. And one of the interesting things that I like about where I sit which is working at GitHub, is the company works mostly remote, asynchronous. So that means that I have the capacity to mentor whoever I want to mentor. It doesn't matter where I am in the world or where they are in the world, because I have the tools. And one of the things that can help us to democratize access to the knowledge is everybody that is learning. I urge everybody that is learning to write about what they're learning. To write Medium post, not like I did this classifier, but to expose their ignorance very, very early, and to leverage the power of the public to continuously learn. So I was in Nairobi earlier this year, and I met with some people, and they had challenges, and I told them specifically, all right, Vukosi. I told them specifically to actually write about the challenges that they're having and solicit feedback from the entire world, so you can become part of the conversation very early on. Because one of the things I see is people feel like they have to become an expert before they enter the conversation. And they don't actually realize that they have a certain expertise that is necessary, because there are a lot of people trying to get in. So if all you have is 1 year experience, it's so meaningful, because you can help onboard even a whole lot more people. And the fastest way to do it is to share your knowledge of, this is literally how I got started. These are the resources that I use. This resource is broken. Let's fix this resource. I got this far in a classifier. I can't go any further. How do I go into deep learning? How do I get access to compute? And just keep publishing that kind of questions, so we can actually aggregate the solutions and then spread them further.
Thank you, Moju. Nando, Mustafa?
I think I'd like to start by saying that a lot has been done over the last year. And so we should thank all the Endeavor organizers, all the Black and AI organizers, people like Mustafa, like extremely bright people that managed to actually convince organizations like Facebook, Google to take more of an interest in Africa. At this NIPS, there were more Africans, there were more black people at NIPS than all the NIPS before put together. That is the transformation that we saw. So this has been huge. This meeting here, it might be small. By a lot of conferences these days for 6,000 people and so on, but this is so important. This is the seed. And in terms, actually, where's the camera? Back there. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, a lot of the stuff you use started here. AWS started here by Africans. We haven't seen much of the return from that creation. You could help by giving us compute. Here we don't have enough access to computation. Cloud computing is not something we can get easy access to, and is the fundamental thing that professors and students need in order to start attacking the problems in Africa. So please, please give us your resources.
Thank you, Nando.
So I want to start by saying two things. The first one is machine learning is not rocket science. I think the tools that you need to be doing something meaningful with machine learning are not that complicated. In fact, many people, if you did an undergrad in math or physics or any topic where you have basic linear algebra and analysis, and if you have been exposed to a computer, which is extremely important, as you said, then you can start learning things by your own. And the reason why I'm saying this is I experienced it myself. The first machine learning courses I took them on YouTube, watching videos, and then going to the internet, trying to search for projects to re-implement and things to learn. And the difference between what people now call a revolution in machine learning or AI and the previous revolution is exactly that. The information is wildly available. Definitely not as widely available as we would like it to be, because you need to have some connectivity in order to be able to watch some videos on YouTube, etc. And this is a reality across the continent that we know, but it is much more available than in the previous revolutions. So even though there is a gap scientifically between certain regions of the world and now Africa, it is much more likely and much easier to bridge this gap in this revolution than it used to be before. And that brings me to the second point, which is what Nando pointed to, which is compute. We definitely need those who have the compute to share it widely. I know there are initiatives. This will sound like a plug because I'm at Google, but if you have a computer in front of you, you can just open it now, open a Google Colab, and directly have access to an NVIDIA GPU K80 for free. Anybody on this planet can do that, right? You can do it today and start running your experiments. That's one way of sharing resources. But in many other cases, people will need more important computational power in order to do more involved experiments, and we need to find solutions for those cases as well. I believe that organizations like Indaba and other ones will help in making people understand the importance of all this. Because when AI or machine learning is not democratized, it's not only us Africans losing, it's actually the entire world. Because I say it very often, we are by far the youngest population on this planet. And in 2050, it will be 2.4 billion people living in Africa. So if you decide to advance in a critical field, such as machine learning or AI, without 2.4 billion people, you are avoiding or you are dismissing a huge number of talents. And statistically, the most talents in this world will be here. This is statistical, because it's where the youngest population is. It's the fastest growing one. So thank you for organizing this, and to all the Indaba people, I'm sure this is a very big contribution in that respect.
Okay, thank you guys. So I'm not sure why the screen has changed, but keep checking out Slido and then we'll just move along. So the current highest voted question is, could the model for funding research in Africa be improved? It's anonymous, but then if you ask it...
Could the model for funding research in Africa be improved?
Does the asker of this question want to stand up and tell us a bit more? Okay. So the question is, could the model for funding... Oh, there's a mic over there, so it's fine. It's fine. Could the model for funding research in Africa be improved?
So many African governments value journal articles as a way to output research, and they measure the success of academics by the number of journal articles published. There's also a tendency to measure the success by the number of authors on a paper, and in Africa it's often the less authors, the better. And there's also a tendency not to value big conferences like NIPS, where we publish and we want to publish. How do you go about to change that, and which steps are in the road?
Anyone want to take that on?
Research scientists?
I don't know if I should really take that one, because that's a battle I have with our management as well. I mean, I share your sentiments. And I don't want to go deep in that. But what I can say is that there has been a shift in how governments actually view science funding as a whole. And you're probably aware that in a South African context, there has been a slight increase in the percentage that will go towards science in South Africa. But I think there is a need for an evolution of how academic institutions actually see output that comes from computer science, information systems departments, because indeed you are right. They still value journal articles. They don't value conferences, and it's a battle that we have each year, especially when coming to promotion and incentives in academic institutions. So I'm not going to give you an answer. I will say, aluta continua, me and you should continue this within our academic institutions and speak to the policymakers on understanding the impact of the decisions that they make on our research. But that being said, I'd like to touch on what you said earlier about how the advances of research within academic institutions also depend on external private funding to actually happen. So a lot of our advances that have happened in academic institutions have largely been through external funding. There is no way that professors within our academic institutions can produce the sort of research that they do alone without partnerships of organizations that I will not name their names. So there is a great need of public-private partnerships as well to advance that. So we can't really solely just look at governmental institutions for research funding, even though sadly, in our case, South African context, mostly academics do look to government. So I think there's also a need to relook how we expect funding from outside and also relook funding models. So it's probably a challenge to me and you to say, speaking to policymakers and continuing with the conversation of remodeling how funding happens to research, which is fast-paced, but yet academic institutions are not going at the fast pace that is happening outside. I hope that answers your question with another question.
Anyone else on stage want to take that on?
I think one of the reasons for going for local journals and not conferences is because travel is really expensive. I remember when I did my master's here, and my first, out of my master's project, I had a paper which I had to present in Washington, D.C. That was expensive. That involved my family helping. That's a huge trip of 20-something hours that, you do, and you're just like eating whatever fast food, whatever students can afford. It's really difficult. So it is clear this day, and mark my words, there's no doubt about this. If you want to have a name in artificial intelligence, machine learning, computer vision, whatever it is, you better be publishing at NIPS, ICML, and CVPR. If you're publishing local journals, no one will ever know about you. That stuff is irrelevant. It will disappear in history. So you really have to compete. By competing, also there is a high chance that, as was pointed out, that you'll get research funding from other international institutions, things like Google and so on, which also happened this year, thanks also starting with Indaba. So I think what's needed is and this is kind of, I guess it's a bit more revolutionary, but it's time to create the African machine learning conferences, if they're not created, and
Yes.
they have to.
Yes.
For 2 years as well, I've been advocating for conferences to come to Africa, and I think finally, I'm told ICLEAR will come to Africa, not next year, but the year after. So it's coming. ICML should come to Africa. NIPS should come to Africa. CVPR, ICCV, IROS, ICRA, EMNLP. What are you doing? Come to Africa, because there's not going to be, people can't travel abroad all the time. It's about time that this is 17% of the world population. So if you're going to sort of go to the mode, or, come here. And it's the same as for companies. 17% of the world population. This is a huge market that you will miss unless you start contributing.
Thank you.
I just want to touch a point on the journal issue that has been mentioned. Because I receive sometimes requests from friends across the continent saying, hey, I'm in X university, I can't have access to this article because it is behind paywall. So what is interesting is our governments sometimes contribute to funding in the universities, and then they measure success by the number of articles you publish in some specialized journals. And after that, their own students can't access those articles because they are behind paywall and they cannot afford it. So I just let you judge how stupid is that. So I think there is a better job that we can do in that regard as well. So most of the good research, luckily now in machine learning, is published. You know, if it is journal, it must be JMLR, which is completely open access, or conferences, where the good conferences have also open access for the work published there. So there is some work, as Ulrich said, needed to be done to, to convince the authorities of the relevance of the work published in these venues. In fact, the most relevant work is published there, as Nando mentioned.
Omoju, do you want to chime in? No, okay. So I've got another interesting question, which takes us to, sorry? Okay. Mm-hmm.
Did everybody hear the question? Okay. The question was about brain drain.
Please use the mic so that everyone can just hear your words as you put them. Thank you.
So I saw a question coming up in Slido about brain drain, and I wanted to ask the same thing. So is there something that those of us working outside of Africa can do and contribute, or is the best thing actually for us to come back to Africa?
I think the answer is yes and no, and everything in between. And I say that because there's a practical aspect, and there's also an idealistic aspect. One thing that we can definitely do is, it's very, very difficult. For example, my country of origin is Nigeria, and there are lots of developers coming out of Nigeria. And what ends up happening is, after 2 or 3 years of getting the learning and becoming part of a global supply pool, it's very hard to convince a developer to not take that job in Germany, where they have a better quality of life, and they can then use that money to support their family. It's very hard to convince somebody with little means to make that sacrifice and stay in Nigeria. So it seems almost unfair to ask them to sacrifice that. If you fall into an income demographic that you have the luxury of working from Africa, you should do that. If you don't fall into that income demographic, you should leave and go earn some money to get to a point that you can come back and then set something up so you can sustain yourself. So I think it's actually doing everything we can and not limit anybody to anywhere. But the most important thing is, no matter where you are in the world, we're all part of the same community. And because of the internet, the world is becoming flatter. So we continue to work and we continue to collaborate and share ideas back and forth, because we need everybody working together to get us to where we want to go.
Okay.
So I just want to say something about this, the brain drain. I think it used to be relevant, but in the information age, I do not believe in brain drain, and I think it has become obsolete. I believe in mobility of scientists and brain mobility, to paraphrase the same term. I think scientists should be allowed, not just scientists, by the way, everybody, but in particular science should be, there should not be a barrier between the different countries when science is concerned, right? And today, you still see people in some places who have for whom it's much more difficult to present their work in some conferences just because they are in some places. And I just give an example. Last year, I had 2 papers accepted at ICML, and I could not present them because the Australian embassy didn't grant me a visa. So I had to stay in France, and I did not present that work. Some of my colleagues did. And this is much more difficult for many Africans here who are in different places. But the reason why I'm saying that I do not believe in brain drain is when people move in different places to acquire the knowledge and collaborate with other scientists, they can also come back, right? I mean, I'm coming back home and other people are doing it. This Indaba is an example of it. It's, you know, all the organizers are a mix of people who are living here and the people who are abroad. And I think that's really what makes the community rich. Like, people living in different places, having different perspectives, whether they are in Africa or not, putting their strengths together to accomplish something. That's where the power lies.
Marky, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think they've spoken quite well on that. And I think for me, this is essentially what we're fighting for, to make sure that we also export Africans to the world. Because you being on that team gives a different perspective, gives the diversity that we're actually looking for. So I think it's quite important for you to be there. And I think my experience of having left the country and coming back, my collaborations with people abroad, the resources that they have access to, strengthens what I'm doing here. So I think you being abroad and continuing to collaborate with fellow researchers or fellow scientists or developers locally, that makes a world of a difference, because you have access to resources that they probably don't have, and you being there brings that extra benefit to them.
Okay. So there's two questions which I'm going to ask together. The first is, one of the biggest challenges we face in Africa is exposing young children to technology-related careers. How do we spark an interest, especially in rural areas? And I feel it goes very well with could we make AI and ML more accessible by means of localization, in brackets translations, instead of forcing people to learn English? So I'm just going to repeat both of them. One of the biggest challenges we face in Africa is exposing young children to technology-related careers. How do we spark an interest, especially in rural areas? And could we make ML and AI more accessible by means of localizations, i.e. translations, instead of forcing people to learn English?
I have lots of thoughts on both.
Okay, tell us.
Can we make AI accessible can we make careers in science accessible to students, especially students in rural areas? Absolutely we can. Something we ought to do is to have like a road show. So everybody might not have access to internet, but perhaps like during the summer, a bunch of us just get together. We all want our vacation and travel. Why don't you just vacation and travel in Africa and take off 2 days and go to the village and do like a road show of science and how science is awesome? Like, we don't have to overthink this. It doesn't have to be like some grand strategy. It's just 2 days. Show up somewhere, set up a stall, and start selling science. That's it. And also get proximate to a rural area, enjoy what the rural area has to offer, become friends with people, build relationships, and just go back every couple of years. So you're like something that is constant. You're not just this ephemeral thing that shows up and vanishes. So you become very, very real and very, very tangible. And when you get there, take things with you. Help people solve their problems in very, very practical ways. So that's one thing you could do. Something else about localization of the ideas behind artificial intelligence is we have to bring it down to a very, very tangible thing that people can reason with. And the reasoning aspect, understanding that at the end of the day, it's often a bunch of predictions that you're doing. Like, get down to the basic kernel of what this is and share that in local languages. YouTube is a very, very powerful means to disperse it, because something that I have seen now as an applied scientist working in industries, companies who are turning themselves into AI-first companies, is you might be an AI expert and you're doing machine learning and you're doing great work, but outside of your ML team, nobody knows what you're doing, and they look at you as some kind of weird magician. And that is not something good, because that is a barrier to actual productivity, because everybody feels uncomfortable and incompetent having discussions with you because they literally don't know what we're doing. So there is even need, the same need that we have in Africa, the same need we have just educating people, it's the same need everywhere. You literally have to go to your colleagues and teach them what this machine learning thing is. and help them see the meaning and value in it so they can put it into a product. We have to do the same thing. That's one of the benefits of sitting in Africa and having an African context. The problems we have here are not necessarily just African problems, they are global problems. But because we are Africans, we have an African lens. When we solve it here, we solve it globally. We have to do artificial intelligence education, period. Might as well do it here, and then those becomes the things that we export to the world. We've figured out how to teach people about AI in localized version and intuitive way, and then we export that knowledge to the rest of the world. That's the kind of work I want to see us do more of. That's what I feel like we need more of in Africa. Practical AI. AI that I come back 6 months from now, you've built something to solve a very simple problem. That's what I want to urge everybody to start thinking about. And also, if you have the means, vacation in Africa. Become very proximate to the things you want to solve so you can have ideas come to you and you can implement those ideas. I will stop now.
Anyone else want to take that on?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of passion coming from there. I'm like, I don't think I need to say more because the passion was really there. I think in South Africa, we've got what is called science communication, and there is more and more incentives coming up for you being able to translate what you are saying to the general man on the street. And so I always say to my research students, if the security guard at the gate doesn't understand what you've written here, then we have a problem, because you need to be able to explain to him what's going on. So I think normally what I would say if I go to conferences, I say if there's 300 of us sitting in this room, and today when you go home, you go to your next door neighbor's child. That means 300 kids have got an idea of what it is we were talking about in this room. So you are so right. It doesn't have to be anything complex. It doesn't have to be anything strategized. Just being able to talk to your local community people, just one child, it makes a world of a difference to them. I must say that Google has been quite instrumental in supporting computer science for education. I think they've really supported me in that because we work with teachers because we believe that it's the teachers who also play a huge role. If we can expose the teachers then expose the children. But if we get into the depth of things like machine learning and of things like artificial intelligence, it's upon us to actually explain it to the general community. How does it actually translate into their lives? Because yes, it's great that it's important for us to teach them about this, but they need to know what are the benefits of this and how does it actually translate into their daily life and into changing their lives. So I absolutely agree, and I agree with the fact that it doesn't have to be anything complex on a large scale. It's actually quite easy to do. And I also believe that academic institutions are well-resourced to be at the forefront of educating the community. Academic institutions are publicly funded. I always say that we've got computer labs that are funded for good. So for me to open up a computer lab and say, come and learn this, it doesn't cost me anything, because that was the very reason why all the computer labs and all the resources were actually established within the academic institution. So we are kind of like well-placed to open up our doors to the community, for the community to know what it is that we're doing and how do we bring in more and more young children into the field.
Okay. Any other takers? A question, okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to chip in something, in the localization and getting the kids aspects of it. One thing we tend to forget is that in most of our countries, there are so many languages. Learning English is actually a status symbol, if you like. You don't move very far if you don't learn another language that is not your local language. So we start from that, whether it's from colonization or a way for you to make sure you integrate with the other tribes or ethnic groups in your... So it becomes a problem if you want to go below a certain level in terms of localization. However, because I work in low resource languages, and the way I sell it is that if very interesting tools are coming up now, maybe around speech technologies and so on and so forth, and we're not just using them for fun, we're not using Apple Siri, Google Assistant, or Amazon Echo. We're not using them for fun. We could use them to support somebody who's blind and wants to be able to access certain things. I cannot read but can speak to his device. And if that person doesn't speak a big language like French or Spanish and all that, or the person is based somewhere in some locality, not just in Africa, in so many other, minority areas of the world, that person will not be able to use technology that is existing today to solve a very important problem in his life, and so on. So it's important that everybody, not just us, everybody, including we've made the case about the number of people in Africa and what it translates to. Even if you want to think about it in terms of commercial benefits to a company, everybody should be interested in making sure that whatever product you are creating can go as far as possible in solving the problems in very remote areas. So that's one of the things I want to chip in. Then on the issue of bringing in the children, there are quite a number of other things online. You could get your children on code.org and so on and so forth and start playing with things. For some of us, I live in Europe as well, so for some of us who have access to that, maybe it's easy. Again, if you don't have access to some of those things, if you don't have enough bandwidth to do that, it becomes a problem as well. Now, the question I now want to ask, this is my contribution to the question where this, and then I have my own question. Coming to Stellenbosch, it seems to me, and I'm Nigerian, and I was working in the university, and I've also interacted with a number of people from different parts of Africa. It seems to me that there are two Africans. I don't know if you understand, there are two Africas. When we talk about the facilities in the universities, the capacities of universities, a university like this is not very, maybe because I haven't gone around very much to know. I know that there might be a number of universities like this dotted around Africa, but it is not very common. Most universities are so poor resourced, not just in terms of infrastructure, but in terms of skills and human capacity to do these things. So when you start to teach, I heard someone mention that the universities are well resourced to maybe take care of local problems. That doesn't resonate so much with me. If you talk about a university like this, maybe, yes. But if you actually pull all the universities in Africa together and look at them one by one in terms of how well they meet the benchmark for whatever we decide to call it, I'm sure that a very large percentage of these universities will fall below. And therefore, is it that the governments do not know what to do, or they are not willing to do that? Is there anything we can do to at least harmonize curriculum, harmonize systems, harmonize whatever in Africa? Make sure that for you to operate or to be recognized, obviously we cannot tell governments how they run their institutions, but define a certain benchmark that people can look at and say, okay, yeah, if we need to be recognized, if the things we do here need to be recognized, we need to meet this benchmark. And they can channel some of their resources to making sure that their institutions meet those benchmarks. And that ripples across, because eventually when students graduate from those universities, they to some extent can compete with or measure up with their peers, not just in Europe, or even if it is just their peers in Africa. I believe that students from different parts of Africa have different access to the resources.
So I hear what you said, and that is, so dealing with our university systems, that in aggregate our university systems might not come up to par, and then what can we do outside of that context? Maybe it's because I've lived in Silicon Valley for too long. I don't even care about what the university system is, what the government is doing, what the government is not doing. I don't care, because I have the capacity within myself to solve the problem. We need to start working. We need to start working out. If there's an institution that does not work, it is okay. Instead of fighting with the institution, trying to turn the institution around, we need to just realize and wake up that we actually have the power to achieve what we want to do. If we want to set a global standard that everybody should adhere to, we should just go ahead and do it. Open a repo, put the curriculum there. Say, I used to teach for a very short time. I started at a University of Memphis, the computer science department. And one of the things I did the very first day is just go and look at the universities, whoever I cared about, maybe MIT, Berkeley, this and that, looked at all their curriculums and decided that, all right, Intro CS at Berkeley is doing this, Intro CS at MIT is doing that, Intro CS at Harvard is doing this. That's what my students are going to do. It doesn't matter what the university said that they wanted me to do. I was like, this is the standard. Everybody that comes to my class will adhere to this standard. This is the homework that you're going to do, and that's it. My student grumbled, but they met the standard. You don't have to no-toe to something that exists. Set up a standard. The standard is already available. Most of these classes, everything is freely available. It requires the professor to do some work and set a different benchmark apart from the university. They're not going to support you. You might actually get fired, but that's okay. Go work for a corporation that allows you to still do what you want to do and get it done. Let's stop talking about all the things we don't have, and let's realize how much power we actually do have, and just get up and go and do it. I'm sorry, I'm about solving problems.
I love it. Anyone want to go after Umoju? I feel like it's a difficult something to follow.
You spoke so well. Can we not dilute that? But I assume you work for an academic institution. My assumption may be wrong. You do, yeah. I think inter-country collaborations are quite powerful. We do that quite a lot. So we concentrate our efforts. We have collaborations across the continent. And that helps with kind of sharing resources. Resources, not just physical resources, but as well intellectual exchanges around. And it also helps with standardization, with you being able to know what are your counterparts across the continent actually doing, and what are they benchmarking against, and how can you use that. So for me, I would really say if you're not collaborating, then you should be. And there are a lot of funding bodies which actually support collaboration across universities that we can talk about after this. But what she said, I think it is probably the holy grail of the conversation that I share her views. I barely ever wait for someone else to come and say, do this. If I really feel this is an urgent problem to solve, then it's important to solve it. But inter-university collaboration is really powerful in ensuring a distribution of resources and skills across the continent.
So I just wanted to add something to this question. I think this is a much broader question than just AI. It's a question about education across the continent and how we operate about that. We've been having this discussion of what is called the Ames College of Professors, and I think most of the universities across the continent, at least the most important ones, when they were created, most of these countries were still under colonialism. So they were created for a purpose, and they were also created with a specific way of operating. And if you look 50 years down the road, have they changed the way they do operate? And the way they operate and the programs, how the programs are structured, does that really serve the needs, the economic needs and the social needs of the communities in which those universities are? Most likely the answer is no for many of them. So I believe the very concept of a university is to be reinvented in Africa. And this is a great place to do it, actually, because most of the population is still young. I say this all the time. And change happens much faster and much more quickly when you are dealing with a lot of young people. So I think it's a much broader question than AI. Yeah.
Thank you, Mustafa. Yes, Nando?
Actually, does this still work? Okay.
Yeah.
I've noticed that online courses are actually having a profound impact in the whole world. So that's one way in which, you know, a lot of folks can reach, you know, pretty much the content of anything that gets taught these days at whether Berkeley or Oxford or whatever. Where we come short is that, and I've noticed this talking to a lot of students here this year and last year, that they're doing a PhD. I asked them, but can you talk to your supervisor at your university? And they say, well, we don't have anyone who knows machine learning. For me, that's really the big missing resource. It's not walls, it's not a big hall, all of this stuff, but it's actually just, and so here is going along with the let's identify problems and solve them. Here is a beautiful problem that would lead in a really nice startup. How to hire a machine learning expert.com for Africa, to help African students. If you have the time, think about an initiative along those lines, try to make it happen. And it can't be as simple as, oh, let's get the organizers of the Indaba to co-supervise a student in, in South Africa or Uganda or so on. Because the fact is, we go back and then Shakira and I get quickly, everyone here gets into their usual routine, drop the kids, et cetera, a million emails to be read. So it has to be much more global. And it has to be, so it has to scale. Whatever idea you come up with, it has to scale. That is currently a big need. If we address that, I think we have made some inroads towards reinventing the university, I guess, in Africa.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to use my moderator privilege to ask the last question because we're out of time, and then I'm hoping that you can all contribute. So what is the danger of ML and AI on employment, jobs, and on inequality? Will it reduce jobs? Will it increase the gap between the rich and who can learn and the poor? And I'd like us to answer with the African context in mind. We're already living in a situation where jobs are not that readily available. So how can we use ML and AI to create more jobs, taking into consideration the fact that a lot of the population is possibly not digitally literate or even just literate to start with? So what are your thoughts, guys?
So I'm going to try to answer your question because I think this is a very important question that I hear over and over. And there is something really interesting with this question when you're in Africa. So we all hear very often about AI for good. And this is a very popular now marketing banner. And in my opinion, it qualifies as a marketing banner because when you're in Europe or in North America, AI for good sounds like an oxymoron, right? It sounds like two contradictory things that you put together and it shocks and people notice it. But who here in this audience has experience or has had first-hand information about a use of AI in a malevolent way in Africa? This is much, I would not say that it doesn't exist, but I'm definitely sure that it is much more rare than if you're in Europe or in North America. So one thing that we do have here is most of the people who are interested in the technology have very important plans and good plans for the society with the technology they have between their hands. And starting from there, what I want to say about the dangers and all that is if we are the ones who build the technology to solve our own needs, then most of these dangers will not exist. The dangers do exist very often when you import a technology and use it just as a black box. But because the technology is developed chiefly to serve a community or to fix a certain problem, it cannot be detached from the community and the social realities of the people that the technology is meant to serve. So I think the real challenge here is to be the ones who build the technology for our own needs. And then once that happens, most of the questions around what are the dangers and all that, I will not say that they will not exist anymore, but they will be much less important.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to take that on?
I disagree.
Oh,
I think capitalism knows no color, ethnicity, or region. Capitalism is capitalism. And people who develop AI, no matter where they are, if they have capitalistic intentions, which more than likely they will do, without accountability, they will still end up hurting people. So the thing is to actually have accountability structures in the way we teach and the way we develop the technologies. Most of the time in North America and Europe, there's no accountability there because it's something that we're now beginning to see the problems with. But if we're starting from scratch here, we should actually put accountability forward and then design the product. If we are able to do that, we might mitigate the impact, and that is a might. So that's one of the things. And another thing about the fear of robots coming to take over all our jobs, I think there's a bigger fear than robots coming to take over our jobs. One of the things that we're going to see with automation is the redistribution of the global power of global access. In that future, Africa will benefit because certain things are going to shift. But if we want to leverage that opportunity that is coming to us because of our population boom, the most important thing we have to do is figure out how to get people digitally literate very, very fast and have some kind of raw materials of computation to understand computational thinking. If we're able to do that probably in the next 10 to 15 years, then we'll benefit. And we won't have to worry about the Skynet moments coming to take over all of us.
Okay. Nando, Maki?
Yeah, I think the African problems are world problems. The world is confronting this issue of distribution of wealth and so on. But if we actually look at most indicators, humans are much better off, and this is all of us humans all over the world, than we were 100 years ago. In terms of education, in terms of rights for women, in terms of life expectancy and so on. So I think we are progressing. Technology can help. We need to remain literate to make sure that we indeed have a fair access to technology. What I find really special about Africa is that by being new in the world of not just AI, technology in general, the sort of being, it's like there's almost like there's the Great Wall of Africa that's stopped, interaction between Africa and the rest of the world. But we have, this is a chance to do it right. Because in North America and Europe, a lot of things have gone very wrong. Like in terms, ratio of women and men, which we're doing much better here. Race diversity, we're doing it much better here. So there's a chance to do things differently here in Africa and to actually show the world how we could create that better world for everyone.
Maki? Okay, sorry.
There was just one thing I wanted to share with what Nando said. There's a university in Ghana, Ashesi University. And Ashesi is actually one of the few places that I've seen in the engineering department that as a black woman, you can go to an engineering department and not be underrepresented. That is a very bizarre thing to think about. But like what you're saying, in Africa, we actually have a lot of these things where in other places, they don't even know how to do it, and we are doing it. So we should celebrate ourselves for some of the things that we're doing.
So, just to your point, I think this is a much more common phenomenon across the continent. I was discussing yesterday with someone here, and I learned that in Tunisia, in some of the STEMs. In fact, I read an article about this. In Tunisia, in some of the STEMs programs, you have more women than male. And this year as well, when we were putting together the African Masters of Machine Intelligence, we had in mind to have very strict rules about gender balance. So we were like, we will not have less than 40% of any gender. It cannot be worse than 60-40, right? And so we put together all the applications and then ranked them while being blind of the gender of the people, just to see what we would get. In fact, after doing that, we had 57%, 43%, without even trying to make it balanced or anything. We received a lot of applications, actually excellent applications from a lot of women in the field. So I believe this is something that for some reasons we're much better off than in many other places, and it's something that we should learn to preserve, definitely.
Okay. Yes, please.
No, I'm in agreement with that. And we have seen quite a rise of women participation in some STEM fields. I just feel that it's important to rather reskill for the coming jobs rather than worrying about the inevitable. So I think that that's another thing that will keep us drawn back over the fact that we're not reskilling for the jobs that are coming, and instead we're living over fear of robots coming to take off roles that are there. So I think it's looking at how institutions again evolve, which some institutions have started to relook at intake in certain programs that in the long run you're not going to need people for these roles. How do you drop the need for students in that and start opening up student spaces and roles that are going to be necessary in the future?
Okay.
Just in the
Nilay,
middle of
do
the
you mind
discussion.
If I just follow up quickly on...
Yes.
Okay, can everyone keep in mind that we were trying to finish? But okay,
Yes.
Nando, go
In
ahead,
terms
and
of
then
things that
Nilay,
Africa can do also differently, when I saw some African countries banning plastic bags, that was amazing. That's like Africa teaching the world. And even though we're better as sapiens, we humans are all better in terms of how we were 100 years ago, our environment isn't, sorry. And so that's another thing where we Africans have a chance to show the world. And their technology can also help. And I've seen some startups here that are already sort of doing surveillance and so on to sort of, look at the conditions of crops and forests and so on. And that's really brilliant. Don't forget, it's very precious. This continent that we have is very, very precious. Let's preserve it.
Sorry, my question is actually the top question that's been posted.
I think it's...
Oh.
Okay, so to what degree would you say having a master's or PhD is necessary to land in a world-class research team versus having a strong GitHub/online presence?
Ooh.
Yeah. I think I can answer this question. And then please pair it with your parting shots.
Yes, so I have a colleague whose name is David Ha. He leads the Google AI Center in Tokyo, Japan. He didn't do a PhD in AI. In fact, he comes from the finance world, and before that, he did applied mathematics. And he prides himself saying that he owes his career to his GitHub profile.
Yay.
Okay.
I have a PhD. Nevertheless, something I'm very interested in is the on PhD, because at the end of the day, it depends. If you want to be a researcher at the cutting edge of research involving artificial intelligence, then by all means, you probably want to go the PhD route. However, if you want to be an applied scientist applying the artifacts of research to solving real-world problems, you don't need a PhD. You need the knowledge to pull the information from a research paper and implement a market-based solution. For that, you need to show what you can do, not this is what I know. So a very strong online presence, a GitHub repo, is far more powerful because I can just go into your repo, already read your code, already start using your work, and then come out and search for you and be like, I want to hire you.
Okay.
My parting shot is do open source, participate in open source so that people can see who you are and you can start collaborating without having somebody give you permission. If all you can do is read code and write documentation, do that. Gift yourself to the world and be generative with your skills. No matter what level of skill you have, somebody needs that skill. So participate in open source.
However, do PhDs, huh? We need more of you at NIPS, so do PhDs.
Parting shots, guys?
Parting short, to answer the last question, there's a place for everything, and it depends what you want to do. If you want to go into research, then definitely a PhD is important. If you want to go into corporate or other sectors, then definitely your GitHub profile matters. But do your PhD.
Nando, Mustafa? Okay, thank you everyone for participating. Can we have a final round of applause? Okay, the end.